I'm Matt, and I'm 26 years old. I live in an apartment that I rent, and my landlady is quite unique. One good thing about living here is that the rent is affordable, which is great considering how pricey it can be in this neighborhood. But there are some rules I have to follow, like no pets allowed, which is fair enough. Another rule is that I'm not supposed to have girls over to visit. I've never brought any pets, but I have had girls over sometimes. It's just part of enjoying my youth and having a good time. Suddenly, my landlady decided to get rid of cockroaches in the apartment without telling me first. I had to quickly gather my stuff and leave. I didn't know where to go. I was really worried. So I called my best friend Jason. He said I could stay with him for a while until I found a new place. But there was a small problem. Jason told me that his wife and kids were visiting her aunt, so his mother-in-law would be staying with him to cook and watch over things. When I got to Jason's place, we had a blast hanging out and having a few drinks together. The next morning, Jason's mother-in-law, Emily, arrived. I was amazed at how stunning she looked, especially for her age. Jason had told me she was 47, but she seemed much younger, maybe around 33. We were still feeling a bit groggy from the drinks the night before, so I guess we must have looked a bit odd to her. But Emily surprised us by bringing her own wine in a plastic bottle, which was really nice of her. I couldn't help but shower her with compliments about how great she looked, and she seemed to enjoy the attention, smiling back at me with a playful look in her eyes. She even hinted that I might get a chance to thank her in some other way later on. I didn't dwell on Emily's hint for too long. Instead, I asked her about her marital status while she was cooking in the kitchen. But before she could answer, Jason interrupted me, cautioning me not to bother her too much since she was already married. Soon, a delicious smell started drifting from the kitchen as Emily cooked. She invited me to join her at the table, and we enjoyed a wonderful meal together, along with her homemade wine. After Jason went to bed, Emily and I stayed behind, talking about all sorts of things, from serious topics to more lighthearted ones. Suddenly, I felt Emily's gaze on me change. Out of the blue, she interrupted our conversation and asked for my help. "Well, Matt, will you help me out?" she said. Without thinking twice, I said, "Of course, Emily, I'll do whatever you need." We went into a room together, and she sat on the bed, motioning for me to sit next to her. As she got up and closed the door, it hit me what kind of help she was asking for. I did my best to assist her, not even taking a break for a smoke. She was wearing me out and I felt completely drained. It all happened much faster than I expected. Romantic relationships were completely out of the question. I was essentially updatable. I grew up withdrawn into myself, feeling lost and utterly alone in the world. The idea of ever finding a wife seemed laughably impossible, because why would any woman want to commit her life to a loser like me? After somehow managing to graduate college, I took a dead-end job at an auto repair shop, which only perpetuated the monotony and joylessness of my life. To cope with the unbearable boredom at home, I started drinking far too much after work, spending my nights in rundown bars with coworkers and other unseemly sorts. Then at 26, my girlfriend accidentally got pregnant. We had one wild, drunken night together, and the next morning, coming down from the haze, I realized I barely even knew this woman I had impregnated. It was far from the ideal situation I dreamed of, but I felt obligated to do the right thing and propose marriage to her. Even though I found a new apartment, I didn't feel like leaving Jason's place right away. I was really intrigued by Emily and wanted to spend more time with her. I wanted to keep our connection going, even if it was just for a little longer. I'll let you in on a secret. Emily had a big crush on me. She really appreciated the help I gave her in the bedroom, if you caught my drift. Story number 2. My life in my favorite city was absolutely miserable from the very start. My father was an engineer, but instead of taking pride in his work, he devoted himself to projects that never seemed to go anywhere, just chasing after an elusive prize that never came. My mother couldn't take the disappointment and stress any longer, so she up and abandoned us both, leaving me as just a young boy to fend for myself and take care of my perpetually discouraged father. I did poorly in school because I had no support system at home. I was the perpetual loner, the weird kid that no one wanted to be friends with. Romantic relationships were completely out of the question. I was essentially undateable. I grew up withdrawn into myself, feeling lost and utterly alone in the world. The idea of ever finding a wife seemed laughably impossible, because why would any woman want to commit her life to a loser like me? After somehow managing to graduate college, I took a dead-end job at an auto repair shop, which only perpetuated the monotony and joylessness of my life. To cope with the unbearable boredom at home, I started drinking far too much after work, spending my nights in rundown bars with coworkers and other unseemly sorts. Then at 26, my girlfriend accidentally got pregnant. We had one wild, drunken night together, and the next morning, coming down from the haze, I realized I barely even knew this woman I had impregnated. It was far from the ideal situation I dreamed of, but I felt obligated to do the right thing and propose marriage to her. My mother-in-law immediately began to despise me, wondering how her daughter could have ended up with such a fool. In short, my life was far from a fairy tale but a nightmare. However, over time, my mother-in-law began to treat me warmly and realized that I am not as terrible as it seemed to her at first, although her opinion of her daughter remained unchanged. We decided to send the child to be raised in the village, and only at weekends did he come to see us. Despite the hardships, I never resented it and accepted it because I knew there would be no better life. One day, as I sat in the kitchen, a wave of sadness came over me. What kind of life had I lived? There was no love, no joy, and even in my marriage, there was no spark. From the day we bonded, my wife, who thought she was the best, thought I was a fool and deserved nothing but all the worst. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, ready to drown my sorrows, when suddenly my mother-in-law walked through the door. That's when everything changed. "Why are you drinking alone, son-in-law?" she asked. "I'm just sick, mother-in-law," I replied. "Oh, I see. Well, then I'll keep you company." "Now I'll freshen up quickly and come back." I waited patiently while my mother-in-law showered. In the meantime, I poured myself another drink. About 15 minutes later, Natalie, my mother-in-law, walked into the kitchen. I poured her a glass and she drank it. We sat and talked, and slowly but surely, half the bottle was emptied. At first, everything seemed normal with my mother-in-law, Natalie. But then I noticed something different about her. Her eyes got wider, her cheeks turned red, and she started breathing faster. Her hands were shaking too. I was surprised and asked if she was okay. Natalie just smiled and said she felt really happy and relaxed. So we kept having our unexpected fun. Suddenly, she touched my cheek gently. When I looked up, she leaned in to kiss me. Then she said something that really shocked me. "I love you, my son-in-law. You're a great catch for any woman. It's a shame my daughter doesn't see that." I couldn't help but smile, thinking about how surprising life can be. After those heartfelt words, we crossed a line we didn't even realize was there. She didn't care about my money, looks, or even how smart I was. Now my dear mother-in-law loved me with all her heart, and my wife didn't notice the change. She couldn't say anything bad about me because her mom now saw me as her special person. Story number 3, when I was at work, my wife called and asked me to stop by her mom's house on the way home to set up the washing machine. She seemed annoyed. I usually try to avoid arguments with my wife. I'm good with machines, so I didn't mind helping out. Plus, my mother-in-law is on her own since her divorce 9 years ago. I thought she might need some extra help. How will she manage without a man's help? I grumbled quietly to myself as I headed over to her place as she asked. My mother-in-law greeted me without much enthusiasm. She didn't seem too thrilled to see me, but at least she didn't start any dull conversations. I knew she had to appreciate my help since I was taking time away from my own chores. So without wasting any time, I headed straight to the kitchen. After quickly assessing the situation, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. In just 30 minutes, I had everything set up and ready to go. As I was about to leave, my mother-in-law stopped me. She confessed that she needed to do the laundry but was worried about making a mistake. I reassured her with a nod, and she handed me the dirty laundry to put in the washer. But just as I was about to walk away, she halted me once more. She suggested waiting for the washing machine to finish its cycle before I left to make sure everything went smoothly. I agreed, so I sat down on the couch, flipping through a magazine while we waited. My mother-in-law joined me, making herself comfortable with her arm draped lazily behind her head. We started chatting casually, and she even offered me some tea, which I happily accepted. As we talked, any tension between us melted away, and we found ourselves enjoying each other's company more than we had expected. My mother-in-law and I rarely spend time together, and unfortunately, we have never been able to find common ground. If we do manage to see each other, it's usually in passing or in crowded places, but this time we were alone. Just thinking about it made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't figure out why. On the other hand, she seemed confident and calm. "Do you want me to show you an Oriental dance?" she asked. I was taken aback and almost choked on my tea. "What dance?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "What? Didn't my daughter tell you that I take Oriental dance classes?" Her surprise seemed genuine, as if my wife and I had no other topics of conversation but her. I nodded and replied, yeah, she mentioned something like that. With a smile, my mother-in-law excused herself and headed to the next room, announcing her need to change into her dance clothes. I responded with a simple all right, but inwardly, I couldn't help but feel a bit skeptical. After all, she was already 58 years old, and although she appeared fit, dancing seemed like a stretch. Despite my doubts, I chose to remain patient and simply observe. I turned on the music, and to my astonishment, she rushed back into the room, leaving me utterly speechless. To begin with, she entered the room barefoot, her ankles adorned with metal bracelets embellished with bells. I couldn't help but admire the youthful shape of her legs. Although her stomach wasn't the firmest, it was nothing to dwell on a normal, slightly bulging belly. I've seen worse, I thought to myself. Wrapped around her hips was a long skirt or a piece of cloth. Nice thighs, I couldn't help but notice. Instead of regular outerwear, she was dressed in a bra decorated with beads and rhinestones. I raised my arms and swayed to the beat of the music, twirling, bouncing. My eyes sparkled. I felt something, a small spark of excitement. After all, the woman in front of me was not lacking in sensuality, and I was a man. The switch clicked on by itself. My mother-in-law gestured for me to join her, urging me on with her hands. I gave in to the temptation, leaning toward her. I held out my hand. She stepped closer and began to shake her belly in front of me. Surprisingly, it was very mesmerizing. I couldn't resist and kissed her navel. She jabbed her finger at me, warning me not to cross the line but to appreciate the performance. I complied. She seemed to want to have a little fun with me. I'm not your average guy either, and that's not all, she screamed with happiness, and in one motion like a magician, pulled her skirt off. I was at a loss for what to do. It was completely unexpected. You see, my mother-in-law has incredibly beautiful legs. At one time, she even participated in beauty contests and won awards. You can't have less long and shapely legs to participate in such contests. Even at the age of 58, her legs were as young as ever. I had never paid attention to her legs before, but now I couldn't help but notice. She quickly put on her high-heeled shoes and spun around again. My mind went blank. I hadn't expected her to be so carefree. I thought maybe her bra was about to come off, but it didn't. She danced around, watching my reaction, and I began to feel humiliated. Her attitude toward me left me stunned, full of display, but no intimacy. I rose from the couch and approached her, but she backed away toward the rear of the room. With each step I took, she mirrored my retreat. Eventually, we found ourselves on her spacious bed. There, we engaged in a playful wrestling match, which turned out to be quite enjoyable. Much to my surprise, her shoes flew up and collided with the ceiling, while the rest of her belongings hung from the chandelier. I used to believe such antics only occurred in movies, but life, as it turns out, can be just as unpredictable at times. Naturally, we were both confused. I clutched my head, thinking of my wife. My mother-in-law, however, remained calm. She leisurely brushed her hair, dressed comfortably in her home clothes, and folded her dance outfit neatly. Eventually, we remembered the washing machine. To our relief, there was nothing wrong with it, and it was working properly. We pulled out the laundry and checked the spin quality. "Well, thank you, son-in-law," my mother-in-law said, pointing her finger toward the door. Once again, I felt a little resentful. It would have been nice if she had said goodbye to me more affectionately, perhaps with a kiss or a hug. Instead, she became aloof and stern, like a snow queen. On my walk home, I found myself reflecting on the behavior of women at this stage of life. Questions flooded my mind. Why do they seek out men? What motivates them? And why do they often prefer younger partners? Are they seeking to reignite their passions, or perhaps seeking some form of retaliation against their daughters? Why is there such a surge of untapped passion within them? It's as if their usual shyness vanishes, along with their long-standing principles. I decided to visit her the next day and prove who would have the last word. A little nervous, I nevertheless pressed the doorbell. My mother-in-law went wide-eyed when she opened the door. "You," she exclaimed, taking a step back. "Are you the one who arranged for the renovation?" I asked in a firm tone, entering the hallway. In an instant, I grabbed her, picked her up, and carried her back to her original spot. She resisted briefly, quickly giving up and joining in the fun. This time it was exciting. Toward the end, I was even exhausted and panting like a wild animal. Honestly, her legs were driving me crazy. I had never seen such amazingly long legs before. I couldn't take my eyes off them. My wife's legs are fine, but my mother-in-law's legs are gorgeous. I got up, dressed confidently, and headed home. She tried to stop me, but I ignored her. Please, I am a firm believer that when someone says no, they mean no. As a man, I believe I have the right to make my own decisions. I didn't even bother to say goodbye. A few days later, I received a message on my phone with a heart emoji. It read, "The washing machine is broken. Can you help me fix it?" I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. She always wants more, however, I couldn't help but miss her long legs, and I won't deny that I quickly packed up and grabbed my tools, trying not to make eye contact with her. Upon arriving at my mother-in-law's house, I was taken aback to find her all set for a dance performance. She stood there, fully adorned and eagerly awaiting an appreciative audience. Once more, she was clad in just a bra, a skirt fastened with a single button, and bare feet. Overwhelmed, I collapsed onto the bed. Her dance was a spectacle of intensity and passion, utterly captivating. I found myself fixated on her feet, marveling at their grace. Strangely enough, the broken washing machine didn't even come up in conversation. 2 days later, my mother-in-law called my wife once more, asking her to send me over to show me how to use the washing machine again. What a mother-in-law, I sighed inwardly. Does she only think of me when she needs something? An unhappy expression crossed my face as I realized I would have to visit her almost daily to help with simple tasks. Already, my mind was racing with thoughts of another encounter with my mother-in-law and her belly dance antics. Reluctantly, I gathered my tools once more, making sure not to raise any suspicions with my wife, and headed over to my mother-in-law's, anticipating more than just lessons on laundry. Indeed, women at her age can still exude a certain allure and crave excitement and enjoyment in life. Story number 4. One fine morning, I woke up ahead of my wife, greeted by the gentle glow of dawn filtering through the curtains. Captivated by the beauty of the unfolding day, I felt compelled to seize the moment with a visit to the local coffee shop for a revitalizing cup of joe. Hastily, I dressed, ensuring my attire was impeccable from head to toe, pants neatly secured, shirt crisply buttoned, jacket elegantly draped, and shoes gleaming with polish. A touch of luxurious perfume added a final flourish to my ensemble as I ventured outdoors. As I descended the stairs, I exchanged pleasantries with my neighbors, among them Aunt Sarah, a striking woman with fiery red hair cascading around her shoulders and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold the essence of the sky itself. She was clad in a chic, form-fitting dress that accentuated her curves. Little did I know her presence would linger in my thoughts throughout the day, casting a subtle spell of fascination. Emerging from the foyer, I was greeted by a crisp breeze that invigorated my senses, accompanied by the harmonious symphony of birdsong. Following the enticing scent of freshly brewed medium roast coffee, I made my way toward the nearest cafe. Even from a distance, the tantalizing aroma enveloped me in its comforting embrace. With purposeful strides, I crossed the threshold into the coffee shop. "Hello," a gentle voice greeted me. "Good afternoon, I'll take an espresso, please," I replied brusquely, my attention elsewhere. "Sure thing, Uncle Jordan," came the response, pulling me from my reverie. Surprised, I glanced up to find the source of the familiar voice. To my astonishment, the enigmatic figure behind the counter was none other than Helen, Sarah's daughter. "What brings you here?" I inquired, curiosity piqued. Helen explained that her mom had forgotten a part for the coffee machine at home and asked if I could wait for her and help her with the machine. Without hesitation, I agreed. 10 minutes later, the front doorbell rang, and the room was filled with the scent of a charming woman. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she apologized when she saw me. "Jordan?" I greeted her with a smile. When she fluttered her eyelashes, my mind went blank. I'd completely forgotten we weren't alone. "Thanks for coming over. Can you help me with the coffee maker?" I nodded silently. Sarah sent her daughter home and closed the coffee shop door behind her. My thoughts raced at breakneck speed, and I could feel the temperature rising in my pants. There was something about this woman with the blue eyes that had a bad effect on me. As Sarah guided me into the storage room, she asked me to hold the bag of parts, while positioning herself closer to me. With a gentle kiss, she guided my hands, reassuring me softly, "Just there, don't be shy. It's just us here, and it will always be like this." Her words, whispered in my ear, enveloped me, and in that moment, everything else faded away. It was as if my wildest dreams had materialized before my eyes. I had long nurtured feelings for Sarah, envisioning scenarios where we'd be alone together on a deserted island. Yet, unexpectedly, she was bringing those very fantasies to life right there in the coffee shop. What initially began as a routine morning coffee outing had evolved into something far deeper and more meaningful. As the final days of August unfolded, Aunt Sarah and I found ourselves meeting almost daily, seeking solace and intimacy within the confines of her pantry. In those private moments, she shared with me not only her physical affection but also a wealth of knowledge and understanding. "Thank you, Sarah," I expressed with heartfelt gratitude. "Your presence has injected my life with newfound vibrancy and color."
Story number 5. From a young age, I was a compliant child. I attended school diligently, focused on my academics, and took part in athletic pursuits. I grew up in a modest community, where my parents labored tirelessly to ensure all my needs were met. However, regardless of their efforts, I made a conscious choice to heed the counsel of my father and mother. My father frequently arrived home late from work without a valid excuse, which was a source of immense pain for my mother. Initially, as a child, I failed to grasp the gravity of the situation. However, as I matured and spent increasing amounts of time online, I stumbled upon the truth regarding my father's infidelity with another woman. Despite foreseeing the inescapable consequences, I felt powerless to alter the course of events unfolding. Bearing witness to my mother's profound love for my father, juxtaposed with the heartbreak and tears she endured, left me utterly shaken. The mere notion that my parents might separate filled me with intense repulsion. Upon completing my secondary education at a renowned high school, I pursued higher learning by enrolling at a college with the aim of further advancing my studies. During this collegiate experience, I forged new bonds of friendship and camaraderie. After obtaining my college degree, I returned to the familiar embrace of my family home, dedicating my days to intellectual pursuits and scholarly endeavors, while reserving the evenings for socializing and spending quality time with my circle of friends. On one pivotal day upon returning home, I discovered my mother in a state of profound anguish, tears streaming down her face. She divulged to me that she had caught my father in the compromising company of another woman as they were making their way back from the store. Despite my earnest attempts to console her, she resolutely declared her intention to initiate divorce proceedings. While I harbored deep empathy for my father's plight, I also understood the justification behind my mother's perspective. Initially overwhelmed by sorrow, my mother eventually mustered the strength to compose herself. When my father arrived home from work that evening, my mother laid bare the truth, leaving no details untold. Recognizing that the situation had arisen due to his own indiscretions, he accepted responsibility and, with a heavy heart, gathered his belongings and departed. About 2 months have passed since then. I began to notice a change in my mom's behavior. When she would come home from work, she was glowing with happiness. When I inquired as to the reason for her joy, she happily informed me that she was being courted by a man she liked. After another month, Jones moved into our house. He was now my stepfather and moved in with us. I didn't mind this arrangement as long as it made my mother happy. Time flew by quickly, and one evening while I was watching TV, I heard some noise coming from their bedroom. Discreetly, I tiptoed down the hallway to the slightly ajar bedroom door. Looking inside, I saw something that completely amazed me. My stepfather and my mother were making love. I could not take my eyes off the sight, which made a deep impression on me. I had a strong desire to repeat what I had seen, but I managed to restrain myself and, stepping away from the door, headed back to my room. All night I couldn't sleep, because my mind was spinning with thoughts about what I had seen. The images wouldn't come out of my head, and it wasn't until morning that I finally fell asleep. As I stirred from my slumber, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulders accompanied by a soft calling of my name. Blinking away the remnants of sleep, I found my stepfather standing before me, clad only in shorts and a tank top. In my groggy state, I struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. It slowly dawned on me that this was no dream. Jones, my stepfather, urged me to rouse from my bed, his voice carrying a hint of urgency as he warned of the impending risk of oversleeping and missing school. Reluctantly, I got out of bed, realizing that my nightgown was barely covering some places. My stepfather was surprised and stood in shock at what he saw. Then he said, "I didn't mean to see that. I'm sorry." But I didn't let him finish. I walked over to him and put my arms around his neck. He looked a little embarrassed, and then pulled me at him and kissed me. I returned his kiss, and he laid me down on the bed. During my mother's absence, my stepfather and I shared countless moments of joy, spending hours together engrossed in various activities. As the days unfolded, I found myself captivated by a charming individual named Jerry, whom I met at a party. Despite being a few years my senior, I couldn't help but fall head over heels for him, longing to introduce him to my mother at the earliest opportunity. So the day came. I invited Jerry over to our house at 7 in the evening. At exactly 7, there was a knock on the door. It was him. Jerry arrived bearing 2 bouquets of roses, one for me and another for my mother, a thoughtful gesture that warmed my heart. As Jerry stepped into our home, my stepfather emerged to greet him, only to be met with a profound shock upon seeing Jerry standing before him. Son Jones exclaimed, taken aback. "What brings you here?" The revelation left me reeling in disbelief. Jerry, it turned out, was Jones's estranged son, a fact unknown to me until that moment. Despite the unexpected familial connection, my stepfather's demeanor turned stern as he expressed his disapproval, urging me to cease my association with Jerry. "You know why?" Jones insisted, his tone heavy with implications. Yet, despite the tension thickening the air, my resolve remained unyielding. I refused to let anyone dictate my heart's desires. Determined to follow my own path, I affirmed my commitment to Jerry, steadfast in my decision to marry him, come what may.
Story number 6. Kevin had been unhappy with this state of affairs for a long time. His mother-in-law called him several times a week, asking him to come over and help her with minor repairs. "Catherine, I can't take it anymore," he complained to his wife. "It would be okay if I at least had something serious to do, but I'm always coming because of some nonsense. I do only 5 minutes of work, but I spend an hour each way on the road. I end up wasting the whole evening." "Kevin, I don't like it either. It's like we have nothing to do at home, and I just want to spend time with you, not wait in an empty bed until late at night. I'll try to talk to her. In the meantime, please go see her again." The man sighed heavily, but he could not refuse his favorite wife. And he had nothing against his mother-in-law. She was a wonderful person, just suffering from loneliness and lack of communication. All of Kevin's recent visits to Priscilla really ended with him solving a problem in a matter of minutes, like a small clog in the sink or a cabinet moved a couple of meters away. The mother-in-law thanked the man sincerely, sat him down at the table, and fed him a delicious dinner. The man did not resist. He loved to eat good food. While devouring the food, he always looked at Priscilla. "She's a beautiful woman, and why doesn't she have a man?" he thought, as if to confirm his words. The mother-in-law wore quite frank outfits, absolutely unashamed of her son-in-law's short robes, tight t-shirts, and home shorts were the order of the day for her. "Hello, Kevin. Catherine called. She's worried that I've been calling you too often for little things," Priscilla told the man from the door during his next visit. Well, that was a delicate talk from the wife, Kevin thought. "Priscilla, don't take offense at her. She is bored and needs attention too, and I can't ignore it. It's not hard for you to help me, and it's a pleasure. It's just really possible to plan things a week in advance, to come, for example, once a week and solve all the problems at once." "I understand you," my mother-in-law replied sadly. There was silence in the apartment, and Kevin had to break it himself. "So Priscilla, what can I do for you?" "Oh yeah, come on. I'll show you this time." The man had to hang a couple of new bookshelves, which were already all over the walls. During this process, the woman was watching her son-in-law's work, which greatly embarrassed and even annoyed him. As usual, Kevin looked at his mother-in-law questioningly. "Do I deserve dinner?" he asked jokingly, diffusing the tense atmosphere in the apartment. Yes, of course," as Priscilla shone and smiled. "You know, it's so nice to watch a man work, how he gets on and does everything. It is, if I may say so, very sexy." Kevin almost choked on his puff. He hadn't expected his mother-in-law to say that. He gave a dutiful woot, but immediately thought about what his mother-in-law had said. "Does she see me as a potential lover? She wants to seduce me," he fretted. His mother-in-law was strutting around the kitchen in her traditional short silk robe, and it was as if the man looked at her from a new angle. In theory, of course, he could sleep with her. Age was no barrier to him. But Kevin loved his wife very much and didn't want to cheat on her at all, and Priscilla was not just a woman from the outside or a casual acquaintance, but a real mother-in-law, in fact, his relative. Weighing all these facts, the man came to the conclusion that even in theory, it would be very difficult for him to decide to take such a step. That said, he could no longer help but keep his eyes on the woman in front of him. Her bare feet with fuller thighs looked quite appetizing. The mother-in-law's face was cute and handsome, and the figure was the most important thing for the woman. Such volumes and proportions were very much to Kevin's liking. That evening, having kissed his mother-in-law on the cheek, he went home. But there, in bed hugging his wife, he could not sleep for a long time. In front of his eyes, every now and then surfaced the image of Priscilla with a minimum of clothes on her beautiful body. From that day on, the woman did indeed bother him much less often, but when Kevin did visit her, he tried to spend more time with her. First of all, he was beginning to feel guilty about not spending enough time with his mother-in-law, who needed him so much. And secondly, now he was even more attentive to the woman and even admired her. Now he was constantly thinking dirty thoughts. At the same time, it seemed to Kevin that Priscilla sometimes even deliberately flaunted in front of him her frank appearance, poses, and awkwardly thrown phrases, sometimes directly screamed about it. Once, while assembling a closet, a man had hurt his arm very badly, so Priscilla had to remember the nursing skills she had learned as a student. Sitting down next to Kevin and pressing her hip against him, she placed his palm on her bare knee, feeling the warmth of her body and the smoothness of her skin. His son-in-law immediately forgot about the pain and the sight of blood, which he wasn't thrilled about. While his mother-in-law worked her magic on his arm, he put his palm around her knee a little, as if trying to flirt with her. Priscilla's movements were sharp, and from them, the halves of her robe parted further and further apart, thus exposing her legs more and more. But Kevin didn't see anything hidden that time. His mother-in-law finished the bandage and left to bring the medicine. The man was even upset and felt the pain again, back from heaven to earth. Communication in that day proved to be crumpled. Priscilla felt uncomfortable. She felt like it was her fault he had suffered a non-serious but still unpleasant injury. Kevin began to visit her even less often, but now the woman sat down next to him every time and examined the site of the deep cut. Allegedly, it was important to her that everything healed properly and without consequences. Although both son-in-law and mother-in-law understood that there was nothing to worry about, at such moments, it was as if a spark ran between them, and the unusual couple would sit on the sofa for a long time talking on distant topics. One day, the man did not hold back. He put his arm around Priscilla to thank her for her attention but did not remove his hand. "What's that supposed to mean?" the mother-in-law spoke with a slight twitch in her throat. "I just don't want to take it away. I want to be closer to you," the man answered honestly. "I want that too." "You're so beautiful, Priscilla." "Thank you, Kevin. You are also a very prominent man." They both realized where their conversation was going. Both were afraid of the consequences, but both were eager to continue. "You realize we shouldn't," Priscilla began. "Shouldn't what?" "Do this." With these words, Priscilla suddenly kissed her son-in-law on the lips, but quickly turned away, embarrassed and frightened like a schoolgirl. "Indeed, we shouldn't," agreed the man, "but I really want to, too." This time, he took the initiative and kissed his mother-in-law back. The kiss was much more sensual and prolonged. "Aren't you afraid of what will happen later?" Priscilla continued to doubt the rightness of what was happening, as if trying to shift all the blame and responsibility onto the man's broad shoulders. "Then will be later, and I'm interested in what's happening now." Without removing his hands from his mother-in-law's waist, he ran his other hand under her robe. She began to actively explore the woman's body, which was now covered only by her underwear. Kevin was clearly getting turned on, and the extra clothing was getting in the way of his pleasure. First, he pulled off Priscilla's robe, and then quickly and skillfully got rid of her bra and then her panties. It was 1,000 times more pleasurable to enjoy a woman's body like that. Having properly played with him, he undressed himself and pulled his mother-in-law into the bedroom to his joy. She no longer asked him philosophical questions that he didn't want to answer. That evening, the dreams of both of them were realized 100%. After the long-awaited intimacy, lying in silence and resting for a long time, Priscilla asked, "Do you have to leave already?" "No, why would you think that?" "It's getting late." The woman's voice sounded disappointed. She would give anything to have Kevin stay in bed with her until morning, but she knew it was impossible. "What, you won't even feed me? Come on, you stallion," she smiled, getting out of bed. Story number 7. My mother-in-law Georgina is truly one of a kind. She may not be tall, but her petite frame is complemented by curves in all the right places that are impossible to ignore, if you know what I mean. At 45 years old, she somehow defies her age, looking youthful and radiant beyond her years. Georgina exudes a cool, charming vibe that puts most people, even younger folks, to shame. As much as it pains me to admit, she outshines my own wife in that effortless, magnetic quality. Georgina has this undeniable allure that I suspect would make any man weak in the knees if they spent time around her. I'm still trying to figure out her secret, but she truly is a rare beauty. A few months ago, my wife got really sick, and who would have thought that in this difficult moment, her mom Georgina would come to us to help around the house. In the back of my mind, I won't hide, I dreamed of how Georgina and I would be, but I always thought it was just my fantasy. My wife's illness turned out to be more serious than we initially thought, and it dragged on for months. 2 months without intimacy took its toll on me. I found myself longing for that connection, that closeness, which seemed to elude us during this difficult time. Every glance at Georgina seemed to carry with it an unspoken tension. As my wife's illness persisted, I noticed my mind wandering elsewhere. My thoughts began to stray, and even the simplest interactions sparked a longing within me. It felt as though my desires were spiraling out of control, and I found myself captivated by the allure of other women. Every passing figure seemed to beckon me, stirring up feelings I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. I felt torn, unsure of how to navigate these newfound desires amidst the chaos of my wife's illness. It was a challenging and confusing time, and I struggled to find clarity in the midst of it all. One day I come back after work. I think I'll go to a bar, relax a little, and then bang. On the next chair to me, as if nothing had happened, sits my mother-in-law Georgina. And let me tell you, she was not in her usual image of a housewife, but in full armor, all dressed up, all in lights, and of course her perfume a sweet aroma, which in a moment mixed with the smell of alcohol in the bar. It was kind of weird, it was kind of uncomfortable, and here I am sitting, trying to behave naturally, and my little friend decides that it's time to get up, and so quickly that I even choked on my drink. My mother-in-law and I fell into conversation as if it were the most natural thing in the world to meet at a bar after work. Yet, despite the casual setting, my mind was racing with all sorts of thoughts. Here I was, sitting beside my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, and yet I couldn't shake the allure of her presence. She emanated a scent so captivating that for a moment, I was tempted to forget about everything else in the world. Amidst the chatter, Georgina, my mother-in-law, posed a question that caught me off guard. How do you manage to endure without a woman's touch for so long? She turned slightly toward me, resting her hands on the bar, and I suddenly realized that I just couldn't take my eyes off her face. Her gaze was so piercing and tantalizing at the same time. And then Georgina does something that makes my head start to buzz. She slowly stuck her tongue out and licked her lips, doing it so gently and seductively that I forgot about everything in the world. Her lips glistened, and she didn't even bother to close them afterward, as if she was waiting for some kind of reaction from me. Next, Georgina glanced at her watch and said, "Well, it's time for us to go home." Having said that, she immediately left the bar. Her tone was so decisive that I didn't even have the strength to object. So Georgina had just left, and I, who couldn't just sit there, decided to leave the bar as well, except getting up was kind of, awkward. My bud was still in a battle position, and here I was walking down the street, trying to cover my excitement somehow. There were a lot of thoughts going through my head. How could I pass so that no one would notice? What if someone sees? What will they think? But on the other hand, after everything that happened in the bar, these worries seemed petty. The main thing is what happens next. So I was walking down the street, trying to keep a certain dignity, and at the same time thinking about how best to proceed when I got home. The first thing I saw was Georgina waiting for me in the hallway. She was wearing a light, tight nightgown on her naked body, so favorably emphasizing all her charms that my friend did not miss the opportunity to make himself known again. "Well, it's time to take care of it," she smiled, and without further ado, slipped her hand into my pants. In that moment, time seemed to freeze around me. My breath caught in my throat, my heart threatening to burst from my chest with anticipation. The night stretched out before us, promising to be both long and unforgettable. As the hours passed, she and I indulged in forbidden pleasures, surrendering to our desires with a reckless abandon. Like two wild souls discovering new realms of ecstasy, we embraced every touch, every sensation as if it were the sole purpose of our existence. And yet, this night was merely the beginning of her extended stay with us. With each passing moment, the prospect of more illicit encounters loomed tantalizingly on the horizon. It seemed unlikely that this would be the last night we spent entangled in such forbidden delights. We hope you enjoyed this tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what captivated you. Don't miss out on future stories by subscribing to our storytelling podcast. And remember to hit the like button and ring the bell to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.